Would you like me to explain the long words, or are we good?
We're good. She's the one they gave the Admiral's son? Why her? No idea. She barely talks.
19 specialists had already written the ending to Leo Pendleton's story. They had written it in careful, clean language, in words like non-responsive and manage for comfort, and they had signed their names and moved on to patients they believed they could still save. They had not counted on the night nurse who came in when the building went quiet. They did not know what she had been, or what she carried behind her tired eyes, or that she had spent 6 years keeping the dying alive in places that never made the maps. They saw a woman in scrubs who spoke softly and asked for nothing. They mistook that quiet for smallness. It was the most expensive mistake any of them would ever make. Her name was Josephine Miller, and almost no one at Wellington Memorial called her anything at all. She was the new one. She worked the overnight rotation on the neurology floor, tied her hair back without a mirror, and moved down the darkened corridors with a stillness that made the other nurses uneasy in a way they could not name. They thought she was cold. They were wrong. She was simply someone who had already met the worst thing the world could do to a body, and had decided, a long time ago, to keep working anyway. Room 412 was the room the day staff hurried past. Inside it, wired to a soft chorus of monitors that beeped and sighed through the dark, lay a 24-year-old named Leo Pendleton. 3 weeks earlier, he had been a sailing instructor with a laugh that filled a dock. Then a squall off the harbor had put him in cold water with a fouled line around his ankle, and by the time they pulled him up, 12 minutes had passed with no air. His body had come back. His heart beat. His lungs rose and fell. But the rest of him, the part that laughed, that argued, that loved his stubborn father, had gone somewhere no machine could find. The specialists had a name for it and a prognosis to match, and they delivered both to his father the way people deliver a thing they have said too many times. The higher functions are dark, they said. We are very sorry. There is nothing left to reach. His father did not believe them, but he had run out of ways to say so. Admiral Owen Pendleton had spent 35 years making impossible decisions in bad water under worse pressure, and now he sat in a hard chair beside his only son and could make none at all. He was a broad, weathered man with a jaw like a ship's prow, and grief had reduced him to a sentry who would not leave his post. He slept in that chair. He ate whatever the vending machines held. The staff were half afraid of him, and nurses traded shifts to avoid taking Leo's midnight vitals under that unblinking stare. Josephine never traded. She simply took the room. The chief of neurology was a man named Dr. Harrison Keller, and Dr. Keller had built his entire self around the fact of being Dr. Keller. He wore his authority like a tailored coat. He spoke in sentences that left no gap for anyone to answer, and he had decided within days that the new night nurse was a problem. Too calm, too watchful, too willing to notice things that were not, he felt, a nurse's place to notice. The first trouble came over something small. On her third shift, Josephine glanced at a medication order for the woman in 408 and quietly flagged it to the charge desk, a dose that did not match the patient's chart, the kind of quiet error that hides in a busy night until it wounds someone. She did not confront a soul. She moved the problem to the right desk, the way she had been trained to move a danger without turning it into a war. The patient was fine, but the order carried Dr. Keller's initials, and when he learned that the new night nurse had been the one to catch it, he did not thank her. He found her the next evening reading Leo's chart and asked, loud enough for the hall to hear, whether she would like him to explain the long words. She told him, evenly, that she was fine. She went back to her work. He never forgave her for the evenness. So Josephine did what she had always done in a new theater. She watched. She said nothing. She learned. She learned the rhythm of the ward and the song of the monitors and the exact weight of the silence in 412. She learned the Admiral's face, the way it hardened when a doctor said comfort, and softened, just barely, when she called his son Leo instead of the bed number. And she learned Leo himself, not the chart, the patient. She noticed the first thing on a Thursday. She was adjusting the line in his right arm when when she felt it beneath her fingertips. A tremor, so faint it lived below the reach of any machine, deep and rhythmic and patterned. Not the random static of dying nerves, a cadence. She went very still, the way she used to go still when something in the dark did not fit. And she watched his throat, and she saw a swallow that should not have been there, and a flutter at his eyelids that answered the tremor in his arm, like a call and its response. He is not gone, she thought, and something cold and electric ran down her spine. He is behind a wall. She lowered his arm and said nothing, because she had learned, long ago and at a price, that the truth is worthless until you can prove it to someone who does not want to hear it. For 6 nights she gathered her proof the only way she safely could. She learned that if she pressed a cool cloth to the inside of Leo's wrist and spoke his name low, the tremor in his arm changed its rhythm, quickened, then eased, as though something inside him were straining toward the sound. And on the 4th night she learned something that turned the case into a person. The Admiral was reading from the old book of sea stories, the way he did to fill the dark, and when he reached a particular line, some worn joke about a sailor who could not tell port from starboard until his wife painted his hands, Leo's pulse climbed and held. It happened again the next night, at the very same line, and at no other. It was his father's favorite because it had been Leo's, and Leo, somewhere behind the wall, still knew it. That was the moment Josephine stopped nursing a body and started fighting for a young man who laughed at old jokes. She learned, finally, that he was not a body doing the work of living. He was a man locked inside one, hammering on a door no one else could hear. And she knew, the way you know a thing that terrifies you, exactly what door it was, because she had opened it before, in a place that never made the maps. They had called it the Bastonnier release. It was a battlefield thing, born of desperation, a sequence of sensory inputs delivered in an exact order to overwhelm the reflex that clamps a wounded nervous system shut and urge the frightened mind back to the surface. In the wrong hands, it could do grave harm. In the right ones, it had pulled men back from the far edge of themselves when nothing else on earth could reach them. It was in no textbook, it had never been sanctioned, and at Wellington Memorial, it was entirely forbidden. Josephine knew all of this, and she carried it in silence, and she watched a young man slip further away each night in plain sight, while 19 signatures called it kindness. Then Dr. Keller scheduled the meeting. She heard it from the charge nurse in the flat way people share news they would rather not carry. On Monday, the neurology team would recommend to the Admiral that Leo's care be withdrawn. The word they used was transition. The word underneath it was let him go. Dr. Keller believed it was mercy, and perhaps he did believe it. But Josephine had also seen the way his eyes moved across the Admiral's grief, and she understood that a man like Keller could not afford a patient who might one day prove him wrong. That night she stood in the doorway of 412 longer than she ever had. The monitors sang their soft, indifferent song. The Admiral had fallen asleep in his chair with the sea story book open on his chest. And in the bed, in the low green light, Leo Pendleton's arm trembled its patient, deliberate cadence, knocking on the inside of a door. She could keep her secret, and keep her job, and keep her quiet, safe life. And on Monday, she could watch them turn off the machines and tell herself it had not been her place. Or she could do the one thing she had sworn never to do again on a hospital floor. She thought about the men she had not been able to save. She thought about the ones she had. She thought about how the whole world looks at a woman in scrubs and decides it already knows the size of her. Then she pulled the curtain, and she woke the Admiral, and she told him the truth. She told him plainly, the way she would have briefed a commander. His son was not gone. His son was locked in, aware, straining toward every sound in the room. She told him there was a technique she knew, a thing from the war, unapproved and untested in a civilian setting, that might break the reflex holding Leo under, and that it might fail, and that if it failed the way it could fail, they might lose what little time was left. She did not soften it. The Admiral had spent his life reading the faces of people who lied under pressure, and he studied hers for a long, terrible moment. Then he looked at his son's trembling arm, and he asked her one question. If it were your boy, he said, his voice rough as a hawser. "Would you do it?" "I would already have done it," she answered. He nodded once, the way a man nods when he decides to trust something with everything he has left. "Then do it, and I will stand between you and every man in this building who tries to stop you." She began just after 2 in the morning, when the ward was at its deepest and stillest. She had thought it through 100 times, every step, every failure point, and now she moved with the calm economy of someone who had done the impossible in far worse rooms than this. Cold first, a compress to the base of his skull, then the sudden shift of it, ice against the pulse points, the body startled out of its long freeze. Then pressure, precise, along the lines she had been taught, a language spoken directly to the nerves beneath the skin. Then sound, sharp and close, her voice at the pitch and interval she had drilled 1,000 times, a command, and not a plea, calling him back to the world. "Leo, Leo, you come up now, you come up." The Admiral stood in the doorway with his arms crossed like a wall, watching the corridor, ready to bar it with his body. For a long time nothing happened, and the fear in the room grew teeth. The monitors held their flat, uncaring rhythm. Josephine's hands did not shake. She had learned to keep working past the point where hope felt foolish, because hope had never once been the thing that saved anyone. Only the work saved them. She stayed inside the sequence. Cold, pressure, sound, his name, again and again, an anchor line thrown into the dark. And then, at the edge of the 8th minute, something on the far side of the wall answered. His pulse leapt, not the small noise the machines ignored, but a true, climbing surge. His fingers curled against the sheet, closed, gripped. A monitor that had droned one flat song for 3 weeks broke into a new and urgent rhythm, and Leo Pendleton dragged in a breath that was his own, a ragged, drowning, furious breath. The breath of a man breaking the surface of black water after 12 minutes down, and his eyes came open. They were terrified. They were confused. They found his father's face across the room, and they filled, all at once, with tears. "Dad," Leo said. The word came out wrecked and barely shaped, the first word in 3 weeks, from a mouth the specialists had called silent forever. But it was a word. It was his. The Admiral crossed the room and took his son's hand and made a sound Josephine would not describe to anyone for the rest of her life. She stepped back into the corner, her own eyes wet, and let the two of them have the thing she had given them. Then she wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and she began, quietly, to write down everything she had done and every reading the machines had made, because she knew, even in that first bright minute, that the war was not over. It had only changed shape. By dawn, Wellington Memorial was in an uproar. Dr. Harrison Keller arrived to find his non-responsive patient sitting up against the pillows, blinking, exhausted, and unmistakably present. And in front of the residents and the day staff and the Admiral himself, the thing Josephine had feared happened exactly as she knew it would. Keller did not rejoice. He grew pale, and then he grew cold, and then he began, carefully, in that voice that left no room for reply, to build the story that would protect him. The night nurse, he said, had performed an unauthorized, dangerous, unproven intervention on a vulnerable patient without physician oversight. That the patient had happened to improve did not change the recklessness. It might even have been coincidence, a spontaneous emergence they would have caught in time. He used the word rogue. He used the word liability. Within the hour, he had filed a formal complaint and moved to have Josephine suspended and reported to the state board. The other nurses would not meet her eyes. The administration spoke to her in the soft, sorry tones of people already writing her ending. She had broken protocol. She had used a technique that did not exist in any approved manual. It did not seem to matter that a young man who was meant to be gone by Monday was, that morning, asking for water in his own voice. What mattered, in the machinery of the place, was the chain of authority, and she had gone around it. Josephine said little. She had expected all of it. She gathered her documentation and she waited, because she was not the only person in that building who had spent a career refusing to lose. Admiral Owen Pendleton had listened to Dr. Keller's account in complete silence. Then he made 3 telephone calls. The board meeting was convened 4 days later, in the long paneled room where Wellington Memorial decided its most delicate matters. Dr. Keller was there in his pressed coat, calm and certain, with the hospital's counsel beside him and his complaint laid out in tidy pages. The board members settled in expecting a routine disciplining of a night nurse who had overstepped. They expected to protect the institution. They expected the quiet woman in the plain jacket at the end of the table to sit there and accept it. She sat there. She did not accept it. The Admiral rose, and beside him rose a silver-haired woman he introduced as the lead litigator he had retained, a name that made the hospital's counsel sit up straighter in his chair. But the Admiral did not begin with threats. He began to speak, and as he spoke he set down, 1 page at a time, the evidence he had spent 4 days pulling from the neurology service at Walter Reed. "You will tell me my son improved by accident," he said. "Here is what the machines say. These are the readings this nurse took the night she woke him, cross-checked against his own monitor data by military physicians who know exactly what they are looking at." His broad hand moved across the pages as he laid them down. They show a nervous system locked in a protective shutdown. They show the precise moment that shutdown broke. And they show it did not break on its own. It was driven, sequenced, deliberate. The pattern matches, point for point, a documented battlefield intervention that Walter Reed's own specialists confirmed by name, the same intervention you called reckless and unproven. He let the room sit with it. Then he told them who Josephine Miller was. "An Army combat medic," he said, "decorated for pulling wounded men out of situations not one of you would have survived reading about. This technique was built by military medicine for exactly the crisis my son was in. She is one of a handful of people alive who can perform it correctly. She performed it correctly, and he is breathing on his own in a room down this hall because she did. You looked at her," the Admiral went on, and his voice filled the paneled room the way it had once filled a bridge in bad water. "And you saw someone beneath your notice. So did 19 specialists. So did the man who filed this complaint. Every one of you decided you knew the size of her by the color of her scrubs. You were wrong. And the only reason my son is alive is that when the entire weight of your judgment came down on her, she did not flinch." The silver-haired litigator laid a single page on the table then, a summary of what a courtroom would make of a chief of neurology who had moved to withdraw care from an aware, recoverable patient, and who had answered that patient's recovery not with review, but with retaliation against the nurse who caused it. She said almost nothing. She did not have to. From the far end of the table, Josephine watched it happen. She watched Dr. Harrison Keller read the telemetry from Walter Reed, and she watched the certainty go out of his face by degrees. The pale, the cold, and then, at last, the stillness of a man who has just felt the floor he built himself on give way. He looked up once, across the length of the table, and met her eyes, and found in them no triumph at all, only the same evenness he had never been able to forgive. He had nothing to say that the data did not already answer. His complaint died on the table where it lay. They did not so much clear Josephine Miller as discover, all at once, who she had been the whole time she stood among them being no one. The board reversed the suspension before the meeting ended. The state referral was withdrawn. In the weeks that followed, there was talk of commendations and quiet, urgent conversations about how a hospital might learn from a technique it had nearly punished into silence. But Josephine did not stay for the ceremony of it. That was not why she had done it. Leo Pendleton walked out of Wellington Memorial 11 weeks later, thin and unsteady and alive, with his father's arm around him. He stopped at the nurse's station on his way out, looking for the woman who had called him up out of the black water, and he found her at the end of a long night, tired and unremarkable, restocking a cart. He did not have grand words. He was not yet strong enough for grand words. "You knew I was in there," he said. "I knew," she answered. Everybody else had stopped looking. Josephine set down the last of the supplies and looked at him, at the young man the whole hospital had already buried, standing on his own 2 feet in the morning light. "People decide what you are," she said quietly, and then they stop looking closer. "That's the whole trick of it. The ones who matter are almost always the ones nobody bothered to see. The Admiral shook her hand at the door and did not let go for a moment, and in his weathered face was a thing no metal could hold. Then they walked out together into the ordinary street, a father and the son who was supposed to be gone, and Josephine Miller went back to her cart and her quiet and her work, the same woman she had always been, exactly as unremarkable as the world had judged her, and exactly as extraordinary as the world had missed.